So let's talk about the options for high availability in Azure. Now, when we were creating our virtual machine a couple of videos ago, we did have an availability option and we sort of left it as the default. So let's go and review that. I'm going to go create a resource. I'm going to choose Windows Server 2016 again. I'm going to go through the process of creating another virtual machine just to demonstrate. So I'm going to put this in the same resource group. I'm going to call this AZ new VM5. Now we do get to choose the region. Now, for the sake of the example here, I'm going to choose the Central US region. And this is the availability options selection. Now, this has to be done at the instance creation. You can't create a virtual machine and later decide you want to set the availability options. It has to be done when you create it. So, by default, there's no explicit availability options. Now, Azure has got pretty good track record when it comes to the availability of a single virtual machine. In fact, let's flip over to the what's called a service level agreement. If you do a search for SLA for virtual machines for Azure, you'll get to this page, and it does get updated every year. And so January 2020 is the latest. The relevant one here is for single instance virtual machine. Now, the only ones they're covering are the premium SSD. Now, remember on the second tab, the disks tab, we get to choose between standard HDD, standard SSD, and premium SSD. So the only one that's covered with an SLA is the premium SSD. And we will guarantee virtual machine connectivity 99.9% of the time. So there is a promise by Azure that even if you create a single machine with no explicit redundancy, that is 99.9% availability. To put that into context, 99.9% availability is about almost 2 minutes downtime a day, 10 minutes downtime a week, 45 minutes downtime a month. So if your machine, your single virtual machine is down for less than 40 minutes a month, that's what's the expectation. If it's more than this, there are some, if we go down here, there are some financial promises. So the guarantee is a financial one. And so if you're less than 99% uptime, there is a 25% service credit. You can see there's some promises here. And if it's even less than 95% uptime, then you'll get your money back on a monthly basis. I think you have to expressly request this. So for single VM, you do get 99.9% SLA. You can do better than that though. So the next one up is called the availability set. Now, availability set allows you to expressly tell Azure that you're going to have 2 or more virtual machines that are identical. They're related. Now, you're going to have to do the work to put a load balancer in front of them, make sure that they are identical. But if you tell it it's an availability set, Microsoft's going to make an attempt to physically separate those machines so that something that would take down one machine won't take down the other. And those could be a bad power supply or a Windows update or some kind of a patch. So any unintended or intended downtime is minimized using availability set, but it only works for 2 or more virtual machines. If we go to the SLA, it says 2 or more instances deployed to the same availability set will guarantee 99.95% availability. So if we go back to our chart here, we are going to the next level up, 99.95, and we're going from about 40 minutes of expected downtime a month to only 20 minutes of downtime a month, less than a minute per day of downtime. That's pretty good. Now, it's not as perfect as you might imagine, but less than a minute of downtime per day is, that's pretty good for most instances. Users don't even have time to complain about that before the machine is back up. And again, this covers both machines. So you'd have to have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 machines, and one of them could be down, but not all of them. Now, the next level up to that is called availability zone. Now, availability zone is where you are the one choosing where that machine gets deployed. Let's say there are 3 data centers, and 1, 2, and 3, and you can say, I want this machine deployed to zone 1, I want this other machine deployed to zone 2, the other machine to 3. So you're physically placing them into a building. The SLA for that gets up to 99.9%, which on our chart gets down to 4 minutes a month of downtime. So you can see we go from a minute per day down to 40 seconds a day, down to 8 seconds a day of downtime. And this is barely anything. So availability zones are definitely the way to go if availability and high availability is specifically needed for you. I should say one thing about availability sets before we go. Let's create one here. So the set has a name, AZ availability set. And there are two concepts in availability sets. One's called a fault domain and one's called an update domain. Now, a fault domain is really an unintended, unforeseen error, and it's usually a power supply or some switch or networking issue that's an actual physical problem. So if you deploy two virtual machines across two fault domains, then a single power supply or a single network switch is not going to bring your application down. You can increase that to 3. So if you have 3 machines, it's deployed against 3 fault domains. You can't have more than 3. All right, so if you had 20 virtual machines in an availability set, it's going to be deployed across these 2 or 3 fault domains. The other concept is the update domain. Now, the update domain is basically how patches are rolled out. And so let's imagine there are 20 maximum update domains. And let's say you had 20 virtual machines. You could deploy your machines across all 20 update domains, and Microsoft's going to roll out the patches first to 1, then to 2, then to 3, then to 4, all the way up to 20. And so your machines would be rebooted only one at a time as the patches are being deployed. Okay? You can't avoid, when Microsoft needs to update the Azure software, you can't avoid that downtime. Now, maybe 20 is excessive, and the default here we saw was 5. And so if you had 20 virtual machines across 5 update domains, that would be 4 virtual machines per update domain. And so when they're rolling out the patches, you would have 4 machines being booted at the same time. Maybe your application can handle that, or maybe it can't. So that's a very important concept, fault domains versus update domains, what they are, and what, these limits of 3 and 20. The defaults of 2 and 5 are the things you probably need to memorize for this. Anyways, I'm not going to go ahead and create this virtual machine, but that's explaining availability sets and availability zones, what's the difference between them, what's the service level agreement that Microsoft makes, and what that means in terms of actual practical downtime expectations for your solution.